첫 번째 세션에 이어서 두 번째도 역시 최원기 국립외교원 아시아태평양 연구부 교수님께서 좌장으로 수고를 해주시겠습니다. 부탁드리겠습니다.
감사합니다. 이 두 번째 세션도 제가 사회를 보게 되었습니다. 두 번째 세션은 소지역별 및 분야별 우리 인태전략의 이행 방안에 대해서 발표와 토론을 하겠습니다. 모두 5분의 패널을 모셨는데요. 먼저 간단하게 패널 분들을 소개해 드리겠습니다. 먼저 제 옆에 백이현 서강대 교수님이십니다. 그 다음에 제 국립외교원 동료이신 이호영 교수님. 그 다음에 한국외대 김찬환 교수님이십니다. 그 다음에 외교부에서 그동안 그 인태전략 TF 간사 역할을 해오신 임상우 대사님이십니다. 마지막으로 대외경제정책연구원에서 경제안보를 연구하고 계시는 연원호 연구위원님. 네, 감사합니다. 그러면 먼저 이 소지역별 인태전략 이행 방안 관련해서 아세안 전문가이신 서강대 배기현 교수님께서 발표해 주시겠습니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 서강대학교 동아연구소에 있는 백이현이라고 합니다. 몇 가지 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다. 제가 원래 좀 목소리가 요새 후두염 이런 게 있어서 좀 갈라지고 기침이 조금 있다는 거 좀 양해를 부탁드리고요. 그리고 제가 시간에 맞춰서 준비를 하려다 보니 이게 약간 스크립트를 준비를 했습니다. 그래서 여기 제가 또 포디엄에서 나와서 발표를 하겠다고 말씀을 드렸고, 또 이제 이게 아무래도 통역이나 뭐 번역에 약간 문제가 생길 수도 있다는 걱정에 제가 발표는 영어로 진행을 하도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 이 발표는 저의 그 공부하는 사람으로서의 의견으로, 그러니까 제가 작년하고 재작년 발표했던 논문을 바탕으로 준비한 발표라는 점 말씀드립니다. 이게 작동이 안 되는데요. 네? 한 번 더 넘어가 주시겠어요? 아니요. 네. 됐습니다. 네. Okay, so I was asked to present on the prospect of Korea-ASEAN relations under the Korean version of Indo-Pacific strategy, which the new Korean government has announced as a grand vision for regional diplomacy. As a steady observer on international relations around Southeast Asia, I think this is a good opportunity to deliver some of the messages about ASEAN diplomacy that the Korean mainstream policymaking circle has not paid much attention to. Among other things, I would like to raise two major points that will require further thoughts before making more concrete action plans under the Korean ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, aka KASI. So the first food for thought is about the compatibility between the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's version of Indo-Pacific strategy and that of ASEAN, which is branded as the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, or AOIP. According to the briefing of the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the key characteristics of the Yoon administration's Indo-Pacific strategy include Korea's commitment to strengthening its role in maintaining the current global value-based order, or rule-based order. And more cooperation with neighboring countries in the region is highlighted for this commitment. The KASI, or Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, is also aligned with these promises. Specifically, it emphasizes Korea's support for ASEAN centrality and ASEAN's construct for Indo-Pacific. However, despite welcoming commitment and continued interest in the ASEAN region, there has been not much discussion about how Korea wants to tackle these two regions' two different approaches to Indo-Pacific. These two different approaches are about, number one, their responses to order management, and number two, their responses to rising or already rising major neighbors such as China and others. Let me talk about the first point in the next slide. For Korea, maintaining the US or United States-led regional order has always been a number one goal in its role specification, and Korea's preference for stability is actually not such a new idea. But what's new this time would be its more explicit self-identification as a global pivotal state, which major global powers can rely on and work together to stabilize and maintain the existing order. This is not a surprising position for traditional middle powers such as South Korea, but it's at the same time not a position without cost, especially when we all see the growing influence of other major players within the region. Some of the scholarly works in international relations can provide some useful insights to understanding possible transitions of the regional order and their implications. Consensus tells us that there is not going to be a premature contestation between big powers in the near future. However, this prospect does not necessarily mean that all the players will want to accept the existing international institutions and their merely secondary roles in the existing pecking order for the longer term. If there is more endeavor and willingness to, among others, to balance or constrain other major powers' growth, they may become more concerned about how such acts would harm their key interest in the process of making their own nations richer and more powerful. Specifically, the rising powers, or already rising powers, goal of continued economic and political growth would likely make them more sensitive to perceived attempts to prevent or contain their path to more power and more growth. A leading Singaporean scholar, Jia-Ian Chong's word here is quite insightful. Unlike great power-focused literature on international politics, smaller powers and their decisions and actions for their own security can also make bigger powers oversensitive or misperceive or misunderstand the situation, thus exacerbating insecurity and tension. Such concerns could shape how leading powers develop their own policies in relations to other smaller regional players. For example, the rising nations will need neighbors to act as buffer against attempts to isolate them and award them with generous compensation or promises of regime's prosperity. At the same time, however, the rising players may also wish to disagree with their smaller neighbors who seem to take side with their rival or help that rival interrupt their further rise, these rising powers' further rise. In a way, Korea's more explicit status quo orientation may send the signal that Korea would seek stability based on the existing hierarchy. This perception could lead to an unwanted concerns from the rising powers if those nations sought to strengthen their external leadership in the region. Meanwhile, ASEAN takes a different approach from Korea. So let me turn to the ASEAN version of Indo-Pacific in comparison. As you may all know, the ASEAN's vision of Indo-Pacific highlights that the region should be developed in a non-exclusive way, which clearly signals its willingness to reassure the rising major powers that they welcome their growth for collective regional prosperity. In this process, the ASEAN-led arrangements are quite conducive to achieving this goal in terms of their institutional designs. Specifically, the flexibility of these arrangements and informal space of diplomacy they opened up can better address changes in power distribution than other more formal multilateral space. Though these institutional features have frequently been criticized as a core drawback for ASEAN's own development, they have been considered quite useful, at least for managing transition in the East Asian order, security order particularly. The Korea's version of Indo-Pacific strategy also highlights its inclusive approach, which is very welcoming. But first, it's still not really clear how it will take that approach. Second, as mentioned before, the Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy commits to the existing regional order without addressing much if and to what extent other regional players are willing to join the existing order. In this respect, there seems to be a visible disparity between Korea's version and ASEAN's version of Indo-Pacific. And besides, ASEAN's version of Indo-Pacific highlights its willingness to create a sub-regional space where smaller states can negotiate with bigger powers about regionally accepted rules and principles instead of giving prior authority to a globally diffused set of rules. Taking advantage of the ASEAN and related mechanisms, Southeast Asian countries want to take Indo-Pacific as a construct which encourages and authorizes local autonomy. This is also quite different from the Korea's approach, considering ASEAN's strong interest in becoming local rule shapers rather than global rule supporters. Okay, the second food for thought. Another concern that the Yoon Suk-yeol government may face in strengthening its relations with ASEAN may include two different conceptualizations of regional security between the two regions. The Yoon government seems to highlight the upgraded nature of its Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative by emphasizing stronger partnership with ASEAN in the field of security. It's always encouraging, of course, to navigate and expand new opportunities to work together. But at the same time, the issue of security cooperation has always been a challenge to the Korea-ASEAN relations. And this relates to diverging ideas between the two on how to achieve regional security. Although a consensus may exist on what constitutes security, ideas on how to achieve security seem to differ. On the one end of the dimension, there's a classical power balancing against threats, which has been a dominant practice throughout persistent competition and military rivalry among big powers. In contrast to this threat-deterring approach, however, there could be an alternative security approach on the other end of the dimension, which disputes such zero-sum thinking. The notion rejects an adversarial approach to security and pursues a so-called threat engaging or rival engaging, as opposed to threat deterring approach. According to this principle, security can be achieved from something like confidence building, preventive diplomacy, and gradual resolution of conflicts instead of traditional power balancing practices. From what we have observed so far about the issues of diplomatic relations with North Korea and nuclear proliferation in the Korean Peninsula, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's security approach will likely be close to the former, more traditional threat deterring approach. However, the ASEAN's notion has always been close to the latter, threat engaging approach. Also, this ideational divergence between Korea and ASEAN seems more likely, considering the fact that previous conservative governments in Korea seem to base their peace talks with North Korea on the rule of conditionality and specific reciprocity, which is understandable, of course, in itself, but less compatible with ASEAN's preference for self-restraint and diffuse reciprocity. Such a diverging conceptualization of security may be a lingering concern between the two if they want to go for further security cooperation. So to sum up, we have these two main gaps between Korea and ASEAN in their outlooks on regional order and their priorities and security practices. In order to upgrade Korea-ASEAN relations as a key element for the Korea's successful Indo-Pacific strategy from now on, the Korean government would want to consider how it can address these differences. As for different approaches to order making and regional governance between the two, I think that giving a full support to ASEAN-led rules-based order in the region and providing actual hands to ASEAN in restoring the relevance of ASEAN-led institutions as primary platforms for multilateral diplomacy for the smaller powers within the region, that would help earn ASEAN's confidence to take Korea as a potential strong partner for collective Indo-Pacific partnership. This will also benefit Korea in mitigating the cost of compartmentalizing security from economy in its relations with China, which will possibly rise if China's vision for regional governance also rises. For example, joining to strengthen ASEAN-related governance will ensure space for non-major states and as non-major states as equally relevant governors of the region. Also, working on regional multilateral diplomacy with ASEAN can give the Korean side more hands-on lessons or insights on inclusive partnership within the Indo-Pacific, if this is a goal that the Korean government sincerely pursues. As for different conceptions of how to earn security in the region, more open and proactive engagement in the ASEAN-led security discussion and endeavors to persuade Korea's reliable commitment to making security partnership, this is a key to earn ASEAN's confidence. The Korea's approach to regional security has been fluctuating across administrations, and ASEAN may not want to compromise the ASEAN principles for common security, which is like threat engaging approach, once again, in developing security partnership with Korea. ASEAN's reluctance so far in institutionalizing security cooperation with Korea for years may partially reflect ASEAN's skepticism over being involved in Korea's somewhat politicized and fluctuating stances on Korean Peninsula and regional peace across administrations. I'm not sure yet how the two sides can figure out the way to strengthen partnership from now on. Overall, reliability and predictability, that's a key to more confident partnerships. So what the Yoon Suk-yeol government wants to emphasize for KASI, or again, Korea-ASEAN Solidarity Initiative, would be continuity and institutionalized commitment to ongoing and larger projects rather than just adding up items and items on the list of cooperation. As the new initiative highlights solidarity between the two sides, there needs to be serious endeavors to shape more common grounds, not only in general goals, but also in how to achieve these goals. This is going to be a key assignment for both sides if they want to forge the comprehensive strategic partnership as declared in the last summit statement. So this is all I got for today. 감사합니다.
감사합니다. 상당히 포괄적인 발표를 해주셨는데 발표 마지막 부분에서 우리 이제 배 교수님이 한아세안 협력에 관련해서 여러 가지 정책적 제언을 해주셨는데 그 중에서도 그 한국이 아세안 주도의 메커니즘에 대한 지지, 실질적인 지지를 할 좀 방안을 만들 필요가 있다. 말씀을 해주셨는데 굉장히 공감을 합니다. 특히 그 아세안의 인도-태평양에 대한 관점 AOIP가 굉장히 중요한 아세안의 원칙인데 한국이 여기에 대해서 unwavering support 한다고 이미 발표한 바가 있습니다. 대통령께서. 그런 관점에서 이 AOIP의 4대 협력 분야 있지 않습니까? 해양, 연계성, 그 다음에 SDG, 그 다음에 경제협력 분야에서 한아세안 연대구상 카시와 AOIP 간에 실질적인 어떤 그 협력 사업들을 좀 더 발굴할 필요가 있다라고 하는 점이 중요하다고 생각을 하고요. 그 다음에 이 한국의 인태전략 차원에서 이 한아세안 연대구상 카시의 또 중요한 특징 중에 하나가 한국이 이제는 아세안을 경제통상 파트너로서만 보는 게 아니고 경제통상 협력을 포함해서 좀 더 포괄적인 협력을 추구하겠다. 해양안보 분야까지 합쳐서. 그래서 이제 2024년에 CSP 포괄적 전략적 동반자 관계까지 구축을 하겠다라고 하는 이건 굉장히 전 중요한 변화라고 생각을 합니다. 한국의 아세안에 대한 어떤 그 좀 더 적극적인 이전 정책보다 좀 더 강력한 정책이라고 생각을 하는데 문제는 이제 여러 가지 그 과제가 있다는 거죠. 지금까지 굉장히 그 전략안보 분야에서는 간헐적으로 한국이 협력을 해왔기 때문에 이걸 좀 더 확대하는 것에 대해서는 올바른 방향이긴 하지만 여러 가지 도전 과제가 있다고 생각을 합니다. 추후에 그 부분에 대해서도 토론이 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 자, 다음은 이효영 교수님께서 국립외교원 교수님께서 경제안보 분야에 대해서 발표를 해주시겠습니다. 한 10분 정도 부탁드리겠습니다.
I've also prepared my presentation in English because I understand that more than half of the audience here is from the diplomatic corps. So please understand, you have the materials in Korean in the brochure. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this very important event. I'm Professor Hyo-young Lee from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. I've been asked by our ministry to speak briefly on how to promote economic security through the Indo-Pacific strategy, and I will be focusing on IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. I've been following up on this issue since its inception for about 1 year since it was first announced. And I've been interested in the current status and how we can work together further to promote our economic security in the region through this IPEF, which I think is a very important tool for implementing economic security in the region. We've heard in the first session about the visions and principles of Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy, and I think that the visions, especially the prosperity, the third vision, and all the principles, including inclusiveness, trust, and reciprocity, provide key linkage to the importance of IPEF as a tool for promoting regional economic security. And especially in terms of one of the implementation tasks that have been suggested by the Korean government in terms of promoting the rules-based economic order, regional order, and promoting an open and fair economic environment and engaging in more contributory diplomacy, and the importance of ASEAN as one of the key partners for implementing our economic security strategy are, I think, all important key linkages that provide that explain to us the significance of IPEF as an economic security strategy. So first of all, the importance of IPEF as an important implementation tool to strengthen regional economic security. We first have a very diverse membership of IPEF members, 14 members, as we all know, and they're composed of developing and developed country members, so it provides us with diversity, which I think is very important for providing the resilience of supply chains, because each country would have to play different roles in the supply chain, providing diversity of sources and difference of technology levels, etc. And we all know that because IPEF provides for 30% of the global population and 41% of world GDP. It has a significant economic leverage, which I think is a very important point because IPEF could serve as a template for promoting further regional cooperation efforts as a new type of cooperation platform. And we all know that IPEF does not contain any market access commitments, but this can be a challenge, but an opportunity at the same time. I'll explain that later, but first of all, while we don't have any market access commitments, we seek to provide a new rulemaking template which encompasses new trade rules like environment and labor and digital economy. And we also seek to provide a new cooperation template which includes all the supply chain issues that we are facing right now. And so I think it's a very implementation tool that we need to work on in order to implement what we are striving for under our respective Indo-Pacific strategies. And we already have existing rules template like the CPTPP and RCEP among the Asian countries, Indo-Pacific countries, and 7 of our IPEF members are already members of CTPPP and RCEP. So I believe that we already have an existing rules template that we can work on to make provide a new rules template to work for the IPEF. So as the US President Biden had mentioned, IPEF is for the US a key part of a new economic ecosystem, which is composed of trustable allies and partners and friends. So there are other versions of IPEF for the EU, like the TTC or the APEP for the Latin American countries. But I think that the IPEF would be an important test bed to test whether supply chain diversity and supply chain issues, vulnerabilities, all these issues, whether we can solve them through the IPEF. As I mentioned previously, it provides for, it could be an opportunity to devise new economic orders at the regional level, encompassing new trade issues, which are actually very relevant trade issues that we have not been able to reflect in our existing trade rules. And they would be based on principles of inclusivity and sustainability. Currently, this is the 4 pillars that are comprising IPEF. I guess you all know. Pillar 1 is for trade, and it encompasses, actually, if you compare with the existing trade agreements, it is very different. It encompasses new topics like labor, environment, digital economy, competition policy, transparency, good regulatory practices, actually areas that were not really focused on in existing trade agreements. But I think that these areas are important in order to prop up or to support the supply chain resiliency or economic security initiatives that we are seeking through the IPEF. Pillar 2 is about supply chains, and as you can see, it's about maintaining transparency, providing information sharing and crisis response mechanisms, logistics, to promote resiliency of supply chains. Pillar 3 is for the clean economy, and Pillar 4 for fair economy. And I basically think that these Pillar 3 and Pillar 4 are basically provide for the governance that is required for making our supply chains more resilient. And I think that Pillars 2, 3, and 4 are connected in a way. And as you can see, it's in charge. the Department of Commerce of the U.S. government is in charge of the negotiations, and it deals with these issues together. The USTR has actually announced some negotiation objectives for the IPEF, and the three objectives are resilience, inclusion, and sustainability. And we can expect that the focus of the negotiations for trade facilitation or transparency in competition policy would be resiliency. As for inclusion, it is the objective of a negotiating objective for labor rights and technology assistance for developing countries. But very interestingly, it is also the negotiating objective for the digital economy provision or the rules for digital economy in the trade pillar, which I think is actually quite interesting because considering the previous US stance or policy direction for IT-related, for digital trade, which has been focused on promoting the market access for large digital platform companies. I think it represents quite a policy change in the US policy for digital trade, mainly that it is focused more on providing benefit to the SMEs rather than the benefit for the large digital platform companies. And I think this kind of signals the higher possibility of achieving agreement in the digital economy area under the trade pillar. So some of the key focus areas for future negotiations of IPEF, I believe, for Pillar 1, I think that the key focus would be to establish new trade rules encompassing new trade issues. And recently, ASTR has identified that the key areas of the new trade rules would be environment, labor, and digital economy, which are areas which the IPEF members have not yet been able to come up with negotiating texts, but I believe that they will in the upcoming rounds of the negotiations. And another interesting point is that reportedly they have implementation committees and rules template for Pillar 1, which I think would be a driver for achieving agreement in the trade pillar area. As for the rest of the pillars, pillars 2 through 4, I think the focus of the negotiations would be to provide for strengthened governance to facilitate the operation of supply chains. And so far, we have negotiating texts available for Pillar 2 and 4, and a concept paper for Pillar 3, and they will be substantiated in the upcoming negotiations. But however, basically, I think that they will be aimed at providing measures to strengthen governance in supply chain through providing for environment standards and labor standards. However, a challenge that these three pillars would have to address would be, unlike Pillar 1, there is reportedly no implementation mechanism or rules template to support the cooperation initiatives in pillars 2 to 4. So I think that the members would have to work on this area. And I guess some major outcomes that we can expect from these three pillars would be crisis response mechanisms, which would be based on establishment of national contact points, and to enable information sharing and strengthen transparency, and also adopt the ESG control mechanisms in our supply chains. So I think these would be some major forms of outcome that we can expect from the IPEF. The following slides, I think you can refer to in the brochure. These are some areas of or focus of negotiations, which I think we could refer to in each of the pillars. What I would like to mention as in conclusion is that in order to strengthen our economic regional security through the IPEF, in terms of regional supply chain resilience, I think that it is important to consider IPEF as an important test bed for whether to check whether we will actually be able to succeed in our supply chain restructuring efforts, because we need to verify whether the diversification efforts of supply chains is actually feasible despite the cost inefficiencies that are involved there. And I think that the role of the ASEAN IPEF partners will be very important in achieving the diversification of sources throughout the regional supply chain. And because there's no market access, there's a challenge of achieving high-level standards for inducing the participation of the developing countries in the supply chains. However, I think one way to resolve this problem would be to sort of think of a give and take model of cooperation among the IPEF members in order to induce their participation. And some examples would be support for building or upgrading the infrastructures, or financial or technical assistance for establishing crisis response mechanisms, or promoting joint projects for clean energy transition in exchange for inducing participation by the developing countries in terms of cooperation and information sharing and supply chain transparency. Another aspect of the regional economic security through IPEF would be to aim for high-level regional trade and investment rules. There are problems, of course, like the lack of market access, which may lead to lower possibility of achieving high-level standards and rules in IPEF. But it could also be an opportunity to establish more relevant and sustainable trade and investment rules that reflect the current trade issues. And there could also be higher possibility of achieving agreement in the digital economy area because of the US change of stance in their policy for digital platform companies. So their emphasis on more policy space, I think, could contribute to achieving an agreement. And there's also the possible use of flexibilities like exceptions or transition periods, which I think could be the useful reference would be the CPTPP trade agreement, which contains a lot of exceptions and transition periods. And I think that using that kind of format could be possible for achieving agreement on rules in the IPEF. So all in all, I would like to say that, end my presentation by saying that tangible IPEF outcomes are very important in order to obtain a regional economic security as the economic pillar of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 두 분 발표를 마쳤습니다. 두 번째 우리 이영 교수님께서는 9가지 인태전략의 중점 과제 중에 하나인 경제안보 분야에서 IPEF를 중심으로 글로벌 공급망 관련해서 말씀을 한국의 입장이나 이런 걸 말씀해 주셨다고 생각을 합니다. 자, 다음은 인도 서남아 전문가이신 김찬환 외국어대 교수님께서 토론을 해 주시겠습니다. 한 5분 정도 이내로 지금 시간이 굉장히 많이 초과되었는데요. 좀 간략하게 해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
예, 안녕하세요. 한국외국어대학교 국제지역대원 김찬환입니다. 반갑습니다. 먼저 오랫동안 우리 윤석열 정부의 인태 전략을 기다려왔는데 오늘 드디어 만나게 돼서 굉장히 영광스럽고 기쁘게 생각합니다. 그동안 준비하시느라고 고생 많으셨고 오늘 이렇게 성공적으로 발표할 수 있어서 축하드립니다. 제 전공이 인도 남아시아 지역입니다. 그리고 이번 세션이 지역별, 과제별 방향을 얘기하기 때문에 그쪽을 추천해서 말씀드리겠습니다. 인태 전략에서 6개 지역으로 북태평양부터 남아시아, 동남아시아 이렇게 6개 지역으로 나눴는데 전반 세션에서도 어느 대사님께서 말씀하신 것 같은데 이 지역별 인태 전략이 우리 대한민국의 제 글로벌 차원의 외교 전략과 어떻게 연계가 될 건지 그게 좀 명시가 됐으면 좋지 않을까 그런 면은 없지 않아 있습니다. 어쨌든 전반적으로 6개 지역과 9대 중점 과제를 아주 촘촘히 잘 설정해 주셔서 이쪽 지역을 전공하면서 굉장히 기쁘게 생각하고 또 앞으로 또 기대가 큽니다. 근데 이제 우리가 지역별로 하다 보면 제가 이제 지난 정부 소위 말하면 신남방, 신북방 때도 경험해 보면은 특정 지역에서 또 특정 국가를 우리가 초점을 맞추다 보면은 오히려 소외되는 국가들이 있더라고요. 오히려 우리의 전략 때문에 거기에 있는 특정 지역 내에 소위 말하는 약속이라는 국가들이 오히려 소외감을 느끼면서 컴플레인하는 이런 문제가 나타난 걸 확인했습니다. 그래서 이번 윤석열 정부의 인태 전략에서 각 지역별로 세분화된 이 전략에서 특정 국가가 소외되지 않은 그런 좀 맞춤형 촘촘한 좀 전략이 있으면 좋지 않을까 그렇게 또 생각해 봅니다. 그 다음에 지금 6개 지역으로 나누는데 우리가 너무 좀 기존의 지역에 너무 매몰되어 있는 것 같아요. 좀 창의적인 지역을 우리가 좀 생각할 필요가 있는데 예를 들어서 지난번에 신남방 정책할 때 실적으로 이제 아세안에 초점을 맞추고 지금도 아세안과의 연계성을 강조를 하고 있는데 그러다 보니까 그 아세안 옆에 있는 남아시아 지역이 좀 불편한 느낌을 그동안 받아왔고 사실 지금도 그런 것 같은데 그걸 좀 아우를 수 있는 지역을 좀 아우를 수 있는 그런 좀 지역 개념을 또 우리 한국형 인태 전략인가 한국형 지역 개념을 좀 우리가 설정할 필요가 있잖아. 예를 들어서 벵골만 지역이라고 있습니다. 벵골만 지역. 벵골만은 아세안과 남아시아를 연계하는 지역입니다. 거기에 굉장히 중요한 소다자 지역이 있죠. 빔스텍이라는 거. 그래서 그 빔스텍과의 연계, 또 빔스텍을 통한 맞춤형 전략, 여기에도 좀 나왔지만 시그니처 프로젝트를 개발할 필요가 있다는데 좀 그런 게 좀 있었으면 훨씬 더 그 우리 한국형 맞춤형 인태 전략이 좀 더 돋보이지 않을까 이런 생각을 해봅니다. 그래서 우리는 빔스텍과 연계한 뭔가의 시그니처 프로젝트를 좀 만들 필요가 있지 않나 이렇게 생각을 해보고요. 그 다음에 이게 인태 전략이 기본적으로 바다를 통해서 이루어진 전략인데 인도 입장에서 보면 인도는 굉장히 사안별 동맹, 이슈 베이스 얼라이언스를 굉장히 강조를 하고 있고 그리고 소다자주의 이렇게 얘기를 하고 있는데 우리 한반도 주변 사강들은 다 인도와 소다자주의를 하고 있어요. 그게 브릭스든 상하이 코퍼레이션이든 그 다음에 쿼드든 하여튼 한국 주변에 우리 한반도 주변에 있는 모든 사강들은 인도와 소다자주의를 하고 있습니다. 그런데 우리는 빠져 있죠. 또 우리의 양자 관계도 이렇게 레귤러하게 이루어지도 않고 있고 그런 측면에서 저는 오래전부터 소위 가칭 카이를 제안했습니다. 코리아, 오스트레일리아, 인도네시아 and India. KAII. 이 카이를 통해서 소다자주의를 좀 통해서 우리가 뭐 기후변화, 또 에너지 안보, 뭐 대테러, 뭐 블루 이코노미 이런 쪽을 좀 협력을 하는 좀 창의적인 아이디어를 좀 생각해보면 좋지 않은가 그런 게 있고요. 그 다음에 아까 안 교수님께서도 플로에서 질문하실 때 말씀하시던데 저 또한 비슷한 생각입니다. 어쨌든 전반적으로 6개 지역을 나눴는데 여기에 나와 있는 어떻든 뭐 구체적으로 이제 다 담을 수는 없으니까 그렇겠지만 어떤 아세안과의 연계를 굉장히 강조를 하고 있거든요. 근데 지난번에도 사실 아세안 쪽이 너무 치우치다 보니까 인도가 섭섭했어요. 근데 지금 인도가 이제 내년부터 세계 최대 인구 대국이 되고 어떤 측면이든 어떤 기준 간에 인도의 중요성은 우리가 무시할 수 없는데 좀 우리는 인도를 어떤 측면이든 인도란 키워드를 좀 이어가지고 하나 하지면 좋지 않을까 그런 생각을 해봅니다. 시간이 없기 때문에 5분밖에 안 주셨으니까 마지막으로 말씀드리자면 이 인태 전략, 한국형 일태 전략을 우리가 구체적으로 실현하는 방향 측면에서 파라 디플로마시, 준 외교도 굉장히 중요한 것 같아요. 특히 지자체, 뭐 중앙정부도 중요하지만 그래서 파라 디플로마시를 하나 여기에 좀 염 어떤가 그런 생각을 해봅니다. 예, 고맙습니다.
네, 감사합니다. 인도 남아시아 전문가이신 김찬환 교수님 코멘트 감사합니다. 뭐 특정 지역 소외 말씀을 하셨는데 오늘 토론자로 인도 전문가이신 김 교수님을 모신 것 자체가 우리 인태 전략에서 인도의 중요성을 어떤 그 보여주는 거라고 생각합니다. 저도 지난 10월, 11월 인도를 2번 갔다 왔는데 한국 인태 전략에서 인도 서남아 지역, 특히 인도와의 전략적 협력이 핵심적으로 중요하다 이런 생각을 하고 있습니다. 좋은 말씀 감사드립니다. 다음으로 연원호 대외경제정책연구원 경제안보 TF 위원장님께서 코멘트해 주시겠습니다.
네, 안녕하십니까. 저는 대외경제정책연구원의 연원호입니다. 저는 미중 통상관계와 기술 패권 경쟁 그리고 이제 경제 안보를 연구하는 연구자입니다. 저는 짧게 말씀을 드리려고 합니다. 일단 그 경제 안보라는 것을 간단히 정의를 하자면 외부의 경제적 위협이나 위험으로부터 국가의 생존을 지키는 것이라고 생각을 할 수가 있고, 이 국가의 생존은 현재의 생존과 미래의 생존을 나눠서 생각해 볼 수 있겠습니다. 그래서 현재의 생존은 역시나 이제 에너지 안보라든지 식량 안보 이런 공급망 이슈와 관련이 있고, 미래의 생존이라는 것은 미래의 국가 경쟁력인 첨단 기술이라든지 이제 전략 산업과 관계가 되어 있다고 할 수 있겠습니다. 그러한 차원에서 사실은 공급망, 첨단 기술 그리고 이제 디지털 분야까지 이 인태 전략에 잘 담겨 있어서 저는 그 의의가 있다 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 특히 인태 지역의 중요성에 대해서 앞서 발표자 또 장관님께서도 말씀해 주셨고, 이런 핵심 분야에 있어서 9개 과제에 이런 것들이 이제 담겨 있다는 점이 주목되는 부분이라고 생각이 됩니다. 제가 이 인태 전략 보고서를 읽으면서 좀 눈에 띄는 키워드 중심으로 좀 말씀을 드리면 복합 위기라든지 안정과 번영, 글로벌 중추국가, 또 미래지향적인 협력, 소다자 협의체 뭐 이런 단어들이 눈에 띕니다. 근데 이제 그 첫 번째로 제가 3가지 정도 말씀을 드리려고 하는데, 첫 번째는 이제 글로벌 중추국가로서 우리가 역할 설정에 나섰다는 점에서 큰 의의가 있다라고 생각이 됩니다. 그런데 이제 최근에 이제 진영화, 블록화가 진행되는 속에서 우리가 이런 것에 이제 매몰되면 안 되겠고, 특히 저는 전략적 자율성, strategic autonomy를 이야기하는 유럽 국가들과 또 이제 상대적인 그런 균형적인 입장을 갖고 있는 유럽 국가들과 연대할 필요가 있다라고 생각이 됩니다. 또 그리고 일본과 호주와 같이 안보적으로는 미국에 크게 이제 관계를 갖고 있고, 또 경제적으로는 중국과 큰 연계성을 갖고 있는 이런 국가들과도 연대를 할 필요가 있다라고 생각이 됩니다. 그 플로어에서 이제 안충영 교수님께서 말씀해 주셨는데, 특히 이제 소다자 협의체, 뭐 지금 김 교수님도 말씀하셨지만 영내 소다자 협의체도 중요하지만 이 역외 국가들, 특히 이제 가치와 신뢰를 기반으로 한 이런 역외 국가들과의 소다자 협의체도 우리가 좀 추진해 볼 필요가 있지 않나 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 그리고 두 번째는 이제 원칙 설정에 관한 것인데, 역시나 이제 1세션에서 김 교수님께서 잘 말씀해 주셨는데, 계속되고 또 일관된 이런 적용이 필요하겠다. 이러한 것들을 통해서 외교 정책의 어떤 확실성을 높이는 것이 중요하다고 생각이 됩니다. 최근에 제가 일본 정부 관계자라든지 이제 전문가들 많이 만났는데 이러한 부분을 상당히 요구를 하고 있었습니다. 그리고 또 하나는 참고로 말씀을 드리면 중국 관련돼서 20차 당대회가 이제 10월에 있었는데 시진핑 주석의 그 이 인접국가 관련된 외교 정책에 대해서 3가지를 중국이 원칙으로 이야기를 하고 있습니다. 첫 번째가 성실 포용, 두 번째 상호 신뢰, 세 번째가 이익 융합이라는 것입니다. 근데 이것이 어떻게 생각해 보면 우리 인태 전략에서 말하고 있는 원칙, 이 포용, 신뢰, 호혜와 굉장히 일맥상통하는 부분이 있기 때문에 이러한 원칙과 부합되는 국가가 있다면 그 누구도 이제 같이 할 수 있다라는 점에서는 중국도 큰 불만은 없지 않을까 개인적으로 이렇게 생각을 합니다. 그리고 세 번째로는 이제 그 무질서한 어떻게 보면 산업 정책 경쟁이 지금 펼쳐지고 있습니다. 그리고 공급망 재편 과정 속에서 보호주의라든지 자국 우선주의가 실현이 되고 있는데, 역시나 이제 우리가 비전으로서 번영이라든지 또 원칙으로서 호혜를 내세웠다는 점에서 앞으로 이제 우리의 역할이 좀 기대가 된다. 특히 우리가 개방형 통상 국가라는 점을 이제 장관님께서 지적을 하셨는데, 그렇기 때문에 우리의 역할이 굉장히 중요하다. 또 IPEF에 관련해서 이호영 교수님도 말씀해 주셨지만 특히 우리는 이 IPEF 관련돼서 굉장히 적극적인 스탠스를 갖고 있는 것으로 제가 이해하고 있습니다. 그렇지만 일본이나 좀 다른 국가들 같은 경우에는 좀 소극적인 모습이 있는데 이런 소극적인 국가들도 어떻게 설득할 수 있을지 좀 고민할 필요가 있지 않나 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 그럼 마지막으로 여기 그 호주 대사님이나 또 네덜란드 대사님이 아직도 계신 걸로 제가 알고 있는데 좀 이런 텐저블한 진짜 아웃컴을 만들어내야 되는 그런 순간이 아닌가 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 이상입니다.
네, 감사합니다. 연원호 박사님께서는 우리가 인태전략 발표를 통해서 다양한 커미트먼트를 했는데 이걸 구체적인 텐저블 아웃컴으로 만들어내는 과제에 대해서 굉장히 중요한 코멘트를 해주셨습니다. 자, 그럼 마지막 패널로 임상우 외교부 인태전략 TF 간사께서 발표를 해주겠습니다. 그동안 임상우 TF 간사께서는 외교부에서 인태전략 준비 관련해서 실무를 총괄해 오셨습니다.
네, 저 외교부 인태전략 TF 간사 임상입니다. I was actually the one who was locked up in the back room with my small team, Indo-Pacific strategy team, and we had to go through probably 300 or more drafts of this strategy to come up with the final product today. So I'm really relieved that it's finally over, personally. But so I think I'll probably take this opportunity to go over the actual process through what we went through to come up with this strategy, and maybe share with you some of the background things that happened in the background. First of all, we really valued the importance of engaging our partners, our friends in the region, to actually talk within and outside the region, actually, to see what we can bring to the Indo-Pacific region with our own Indo-Pacific strategy. So I thank I see the Australian ambassador here, the Dutch ambassador. We really had a really good discussion on this particular issue. And so the starting point of all this exercise was not Korea reacting to a certain country, not Korea looking around, seeing what's happening out in the outside world, but really the starting point, as we've been we've emphasized over and over again, our foreign minister, particularly in his speech, was how Korea could contribute more positively to this Indo-Pacific region, commensurate to the international stature that we have today. So that's the starting point. And the reason why we're doing that is because we see that it is about time. It is high time, or it's been delayed actually, that Korea do something, assume a role that is commensurate to what others expect us to do. So with that, I think we first of all talked with our for ASEAN countries. I actually made a lot of travels. I was actually a DG for the North American Affairs Bureau, but thanks to this other hat that I was wearing, I could travel to all these different corners of the world, including Australia and New Zealand, and ASEAN, and Europe too. I was actually in France and Brussels. So we really went through a whole lot of consultations with our friends to see what we can bring together with our friends and partners in our strategy, and that included India too. I actually traveled to India to meet with my counterpart, who was in charge of North American affairs, but also the DG for the Northeast Asia think tanks, and really listen to and they were also very much interested in what we're going to do with our Indo-Pacific strategy. So rest assured that India is right there in the picture, and actually I'm leaving next week to India. I will be the DCM, the Korean Embassy in India. So I'll be there on the ground following up with this strategy. So India is right there in our picture. And also ASEAN too. ASEAN is very important. When I met with my ASEAN colleagues, one of my Vietnamese colleagues, Indonesian colleagues, and also the ASEAN Bureau, the overall theme was how important ASEAN is to us. Especially, we'll be respecting the ASEAN centrality, and we're not trying to be intrusive, not interfere with the ASEAN's efforts to lead your own efforts to promote your institutions. We're actually there to support your needs, and we're very mindful of the way the business is conducted within ASEAN. So in that aspect too, I think one of the one of the points that was raised by Professor Baer was the compatibility of our security cooperation ideas with those of the ASEAN countries. But I could really tell you at the spot that we do think it's very compatible for once, because we've always, the gist of this strategy is listening to our partners and being mindful of their needs. And second, it's not just the traditional security cooperation, but it's a comprehensive cooperation that was laid out by our Deputy Minister, Choi, in his presentation. We're looking into a concept of security cooperation that encompasses not just traditional security cooperation, but also the new things just like cyber, public health, and so forth. And I think those domains are very helpful for both us and ASEAN. All right, so I'll stop at that. Thank you very much.
감사합니다. 지금까지 한국의 인태 전략 준비 과정에서 주요 파트너 국가들과 긴밀한 소통을 했다라는 말씀을 해주셨는데 굉장히 중요한 포인트 같습니다. 한국이 일방적으로 만들어낸 전략이 아니고 그동안 지난 7개월 동안 주요 파트너 국가들, 카운터파트들을 만나서 그들의 얘기를 듣고 인풋을 반영한 그런 이니셔티브라고 하는 점을 지켜주셨는데 굉장히 good news, rest assured, good news라고 생각합니다. 시간이 지금 예상보다 많이 지체가 됐습니다. 그래서 양해를 해주신다면 패널들께서 남은 얼마간의 시간 동안 플로어를 바로 오픈을 해서 플로어로부터 코멘트나 퀘스천을 받도록 하겠습니다. 질문이나 코멘트가 있으신 분은 성함과 직함을 밝혀주시고 손을 들어주시면 감사하겠습니다. 패널들께서 너무 잘 설명해 주셔서 충분한 소통이 되었는가요? 네. 네, 저기 뒤에 우리 레이디 부탁드리겠습니다.
Joanna Donowart, Ambassador for the Netherlands. I just want to thank you for organizing this, and big compliments of the extensive work that you've done, and being a member also of the European Union. We very much look forward in cooperating further with you. So it's not a question, it's just saying a big thank you for organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we also consulted with the European Union partners as well, right? Okay, great. 네, gentleman in the front.
Thank you so much for the presentations. I've been following the session 1, session 2. I'm from Tanzania, ambassador from Tanzania to Korea. My quick comment would be on the first appreciation that in this regional strategy, we have seen the Republic of Korea going beyond the immediate geography. Even the Indo-Pacific in this sense, including the eastern coast of Africa, which is something very positive and something very much welcomed, because we believe that going forward, we in Africa believe that Korea has to engage Africa and Africa has to engage Korea. We have to redefine the kind of relations that we have, and most importantly, to graduate at a certain point of time from ODA cooperation to trade and investment. And that's why we welcome this strategy. And since you have indicated that you're going for a specific regional strategies, we're expecting more when it comes to that level, especially in relations of trade and investment as well, apart from the ODA. ODA is very much welcomed, it's very much good, but we think we can graduate in taking our relationship further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Ambassador, if you elaborate a little more of the role of ODA in the overall Seoul's our case Indo-Pacific strategy, could you add comments?
I'll just give you a little background on how we on the regional scope. Actually, when we first discussed how to define the regional scope of our Indo-Pacific strategy, the first thing that we agreed upon was not to draw a line saying that A country is in and B country is out. So what we laid out was the scope of the geographical outreach of the Indo-Pacific region, and second, the African Indian coastal area. Of course, it's there. It connects the Indian Ocean, so it's as a natural extension of that. We really thought that it would be very important to include Africa too, and yes, we did read all the other strategies that are already in the market, 10+ strategies already. And there are some that included Africa, some that did not. But we do think Africa is a core partner for us for the future, not just in terms of ODA. I mean, but as our foreign minister rightly pointed out, we are ready to share whatever we can, whatever we do, whatever we can with our African friends to see how we can do on your path to national development. But it's not just that. I think the more important thing is to actually have more investment coming in, economic cooperation with the African countries that would actually create jobs. So it's the whole pillar of prosperity that we're talking about when we included the African region. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다. 시간이 예상된 보다 지금 30분 초과됐는데요. 정리를 하겠습니다. 오늘 2시부터 장관님의 기조 연설에서 1, 2세션 전문가 그다음에 그동안 인태전략의 성안에 관여했던 정부 관계자들을 통해서 한국의 인태전략에 대해서 좀 더 분명하고 정확한 이해를 넓힐 수 있는 그런 설명회가 되었다고 생각합니다. 여러 가지 발표되기 이전에 그동안 오해나 여러 가지 우려나 억측이 있었는데 한국의 인도태평양 전략은 그동안 임 대사님께서 그 발표 중에 딜레이드라고 이렇게 표현을 하셨는데 한국의 어떤 그 인태 지역에 대한 적극적인 관여와 역할이 어떻게 보면 좀 지체되었던 측면이 있었다고 보고요. 그런 면에서 굉장히 프로액티브한 한국의 좀 더 어떤 그 인태 지역의 번영과 평화, 안정을 위한 한국의 좀 더 어떤 적극적인 기여를 위한 그런 어떤 그 대외 정책적 의지의 표현이고 이런 이 커미트먼트를 향후의 구체적인 tangible outcome으로 그 다음에 주요 파트너 국가들과 어떤 그런 그 파트너십을 통해서 만들어내는 과정은 또 상당한 그런 이 도전이 있다고 생각합니다. 그런 면에서 오늘 설명회를 통해서 여러 이 파트너 국가들과 함께 향후에 좀 더 긴밀한 그런 어떤 지역 협력을 만들어 나갈 필요가 있다. 이런 걸 개인적으로 느낍니다. 자, 이로써 오늘 설명회를 모두 마치겠습니다. 오늘 발표해 주신 패널들께 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.